Before we kick off today's session, I have a couple of quick announcements for students. First, tickets for Climate Cap, the MBA summit that we are hosting in April. Tickets are going to go on sale in early December. You'll see here tickets are actually on sale for every other school except for MIT on December 1st. But we're going to send communication out specifically to MIT students, and tickets will be available for purchase on December 8th. Another quick announcement, on Monday, we're co-hosting an event with the MIT Infrastructure Club and the MIT Energy and Climate Club, featuring Christopher Minker, apologies, from BlackRock. If you haven't yet registered, link is up on the screen, and it's also on Sloan Groups. And then lastly, next week's Sustainability Lunch Series, we're hosting Dr. Noah Wilson-Rich. He was actually a featured speaker at last year's Climate Cap, and he was so impactful that the students asked that he come to campus and give a similar talk to MIT Sloan students. So he's going to talk all about his research, which features beehives data around honey to be able to predict weather outcomes. So we're very excited for that. If you haven't yet RSVP'd, up on Sloan Groups as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce both of our speakers today. First up, we have Jason Jay. He's a senior lecturer and director of the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative. He teaches executive and master's level courses on strategy, innovation, and leadership for sustainable business. Jason's current research is the Owning Impact Project, which explores how investors can drive systems change and holistic positive impact in arenas like climate change, biodiversity, and social inequality. And then Hibah will be joining us as our other speaker. She's a 2025 MBA graduate from the MIT Sloan School of Management and a former researcher at the International Monetary Fund, where she worked with multiple emerging markets in Asia, offering economic policy advice and recommendations to governments on areas such as climate change and sustainable economic growth. Her research now bridges policy, finance, and strategy with a focus on systemic investing and exploring how capital can be deployed to generate transformative long-term impact. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jason. So please join me in welcoming him.
Hi, everybody. What I'm going to do is just give a little bit of a conceptual intro to how we think about impact investing and systemic investing within our team here at MIT Sloan, and then use that as a springboard into describing the project that Hibah led on last year, which she will do. So, what is systemic investing? So I should start by defining kind of the terrain of different approaches to incorporating sustainability and impact considerations into the investing process. So this is a picture that comes from Bridges Fund. You'll see a variety of these different kinds of spectra of capital or varieties of approaches and terminology. But this is one that I particularly like. So the idea here is that there is traditional investing where your goal is to accept competitive risk-adjusted financial returns. That is what a lot of investors are trying to do. If you are running a pension fund in the United States under the ERISA laws, you have a fiduciary duty to try to maximize your long-term returns because you have pensioners who you're trying to ensure their retirement accounts. Added on that layer is what's sometimes called responsible investing, which is in the process of trying to manage for long-term viability of my portfolio, I should try to avoid harm and mitigate ESG risks, mitigate environmental, social, and governance risks that might affect my portfolio. So if I have a coal-fired power plant in Europe where there is a price on carbon that's going to make it less viable, that's a risk I need to be managing as part of just good responsible management. And so, ESG has become something that's been incorporated and mainstreamed into a lot of investment practice. But you could go beyond that. You can go to what's sometimes called sustainable investing, where you're trying to benefit stakeholders. You're trying to not just do less harm or avoid risks, but you're trying to invest capital toward in ways that are actively improving the world. Like, so maybe you do an investment fund, a public equities fund that's doing renewable energy or electric vehicles in the hopes that that will be part of riding the wave on decarbonization. And then you can go even further beyond that to say, I want to actively contribute to solutions. I want to generate positive change that otherwise, wouldn't happen for underserved people and for the planet. And that is what we call impact investing, where I'm trying to have an impact with my capital. And within impact investing, there's a spectrum from finance first to impact first, meaning that I can try to do that in a way that's trying to achieve market rate returns, or I can be willing to take some kinds of a concessionary, what's sometimes called concessionary investing, where I'm willing to be more patient and have a longer time to liquidity, or I'm willing to take more risk for the amount of return, or I'm willing to take less return for the same amount of risk, so that I can bring capital to where other investors wouldn't otherwise be there, and I can have some additionality, and I can have a positive impact. If you go far enough down that trajectory, then I go to where I might be accepting only partially preserving my capital, or even accepting full loss of my capital, meaning I'm giving it away. And that's what we call grant making or gifts or philanthropy. So this allows us to think about the variety of ways that you could use capital with some kind of intentionality that mixes financial and impact intentions. And so depending on your mandate and where you sit in the spectrum and what kind of fiduciary duties you have, you may have license to operate at various different parts of the spectrum. And that's the terrain of impact investing. In the space of impact investing, there's a few tools or techniques that have become common practice for investors who are looking to actively promote solutions or to drive important change in the world. One of those tools is called catalytic capital. Catalytic capital is where I am putting capital somewhere where it otherwise wouldn't be, where there's some additionality, and where I am maybe de-risking the investment so that other investors might be able to come in. So good examples would be very early stage technology investment in the climate tech arena, where I might take on risks that others aren't willing to take on. But then once we've proven out that the new energy storage technology or nuclear fusion device actually works, then other investors will come in later in the game. Another way to be catalytic is through, for example, investing in frontier markets, where their access to capital may not be there in rural communities in remote parts of Zambia, for example. And my capital allocation is catalytic because there isn't otherwise capital that it's there. So through the allocation of capital, I can try to have an impact. The other way I can try to have an impact is through the influencing of the companies that I'm investing in. And that's what's called active ownership. And that means because I have an equity position in a company, I can actually influence them, or because I'm issuing debt to a company and I want them to be a good borrower for me, I might go and engage with management and say, hey, I want you to shift your utility company to shift your power plants toward lower carbon energy, or go to a bank and say, I want you to provide financial access to lower income people, or do a better job for women or marginalized groups. And that active ownership could sort of change the world. So those are some of the tools that are in the tool belt for impact investors. And there's a lot of research that happens here at Sloan and other places about the efficacy of these different kinds of mechanisms. And there's been exciting things that have been invented out of MIT, like the Prime Coalition, which is a whole vehicle for doing catalytic capital. The issue that we are confronting, and which practitioners have been confronting, is that all of these approaches have one profound limitation, which is that they tend to look at the individual company as the target of action, or the individual technology. So impact investing, where I'm trying to create solutions, the tendency is to invest in point solutions, in single technologies that I'm hoping are going to solve the big environmental problem. Or if I'm trying to mitigate risk, I'm engaging with a single company to say, I hope that you can reduce your emissions or mitigate this risk. But the challenges that we face are not amenable to innovation by solving by sort of single technologies. Jason Engel, who is a friend he's an extended member of the Ford family, he created an impact investing fund focused on food and agriculture. He was one of the first sort of food and ag tech investors. And when they started out their fund, they had this aspiration to sort of change the food system, but they went after it with a venture capital mindset of we're going to go look for one deal at a time, and we're going to invest in cool companies and technologies. And during the pandemic, he sort of stepped back to reflect on what they had learned in the first 10 years of their work. And what he saw was, we're winning the battles, but losing the war. They had been an early investor in Beyond Meat, which is a plant-based meat alternative. And they took that company public. They made a lot of money. And people eating Beyond Meat substitute a little bit away from meat that they would have otherwise eaten with greater environmental impact. But at the end of the day, he said, those Beyond Meat burgers are in the same freezer, in the same grocery store, in the same supply chain, in the same food system. We didn't change the food system. And even the incremental nudge that we hope to make to pull people from animal-based meat to plant-based meat isn't happening as much because the grocery stores are putting the plant-based meat next to the original garden burgers that were already there. So they're substituting one vegetarian food for another and not really driving changes in meat consumption. So it forced him to reevaluate and ask the question, how do we actually change the food system with capital? Which is, and then sort of revisit that question. And we see a similar phenomenon happening in large fiduciary institutional investors who are saying, we've done a bunch of engaging with single companies trying to get them to reduce their emissions, but emissions are still going up in the whole economy. There's bigger systemic changes that might be required if we want to mitigate the systemic risk of that climate poses to all of our portfolios and all of our future pension beneficiaries. So this has led to a systems turn or a systemic perspective starting to enter into the investing conversation. And the idea of systemic investing is where you're deliberately trying to drive systems change through capital. And what that looks like is saying, how do we get beyond the limitations of any one of these investments? And that often means looking even beyond the limits of what we define as asset classes. So this is an AI-generated image of a sustainable future, okay? Yeah, of a sustainable utopia, right? So like, what might we be able to have? So this might be the future that we want to have. But if we think about what does it take to invest in order to produce this future, there's a few different things going on. There's venture capital for maybe the new vertical farming technologies. There's infrastructure investments in some of the key building blocks of the value chain. There's real estate investments in the farms and housing. There are carbon markets, which might provide incentives for new kinds of farming and other activities. And each of these is, in a sense, a different investment activity. And some activities may actually be philanthropic, investing in the training center and the community center through which all these people are coming together and creating this new, better future together. So a systemic change perspective forces us to go beyond the point solutions and to say, what would it look like to understand the system, understand the leverage points for making change in the system, and understand the solutions for pushing on those leverage points, and create constellations of activity, portfolios that go across asset classes, including philanthropy, to drive those changes. And that's the vision of systemic investing and kind of the systems lens. So that if you bring that idea back to this picture of the spectrum of capital, it's not about any one of these particular nodes or solutions or investors. It's about saying, how can we combine all of these? How can we build coalitions of investors who are working across asset classes using the variety of these techniques to push on the leverage points we need to drive the changes that we want? And in the process, compose portfolios that are not just about mitigating risk through diversification, but actually enhancing value through synergy, finding the complementarities, the combinatorial effects, the ways that 1 + 1 can be greater than 2. So the research that our group does here under the Owning Impact project is to understand this domain of practice, to understand systemic investing as a nested bundle of practices, of people investing in backbone organizations, to coordinate activity like food waste innovation, investing in ways that look for and and enhance combinatorial effects between different investments, where there's where there's capital and attention allocated towards understanding the system and getting strategic about who are the key stakeholders that need to be engaged and what are the key leverage points. The Owning Impact research team involves a few people. Idungas Samson, who's here, is a research scientist. Hibah Khan was a student with us this past year. And we have a few other folks who are working with us to try to empirically understand when investors go after this set of ideas, how do they go about it? What do they do? What are we learning from practice? As well as, can we help to advance practice? And that question about how we can go to advance practice led to the effort toward helping investors get off the starting block and creating a starter kit for people to do systemic investing. So what I'm going to do is hand the floor to Hibah to describe a bit about what we did in that process and how we developed the starter kit.
It's working.
Yep.
Amazing. So as Jason described, and the name also suggests, the starter kit is developed for anyone who is getting started into the space of systemic investing. So whether you're a family office, you're a foundation, you're an asset manager, you're an individual investor, or you're a student or someone in the strategy role who's trying to change the policies within their own organization, or you're an ecosystem enabler, this is a good place to start. It was designed in collaboration with 9 MIT students, including ID, who's sitting there, a research scientist with the Owning Impact project, along with 7 investors who partnered with us and shared information around how they were practicing investing and how they were trying to move towards a more systemic approach. We also collaborated with Center for Sustainable Finance and Private Wealth, and we had expert advice from Dominic Hofstetter from Transcap, Eva Gladdick from Metabolic, Jason Engel, who also Jay mentioned, and we also had Alban Yao, who is a Sloan alumni who's done a lot of research in this space. So the main idea of the starter kit was to basically bridge the gap between theory and practice. So when I started in this space, I saw a lot of articles and research coming out saying the way that we were doing business isn't enough to solve the problems and challenges that we're facing today. But not a lot of that stuff translated into, how do I get started in this space? What can I do as an individual or as, an investor to really bring about systems change? So that's where this whole project started. And we wanted to come up with practical steps that you can take and move in order to move from traditional finance to more a systemic approach. Okay. Perfect. So the starter kit highlights 6 key stages or milestones, if you may. Before we even start, I want to state that even though this is a linear kind of figure, systemic investing is non-linear. You need to go back and forth between stages. You need to reevaluate, evolve, and constantly keep updating your research and so on. So even though it looks like there's stages and steps, there's a lot of going back and forth between these stages. So I'll start with the first one, which says clarifying your purpose. So one key thing about systemic investing is that you need to align your values with the change goals that you have. And for this, we developed a tool called the Ikigai for Systemic Investors. So basically, each stage that you see here comes along with some key questions that you need to ask and a tool that really helps you move from this stage to the next. So yes, going back to the first stage, which is clarifying your purpose and value. We had the Ikigai framework. If you scan the QR code here, you'll be able to go to a Miro board, which basically showcases all these different tools. They're not as pretty as the one that you see in the published toolkit, thanks to Emma, who is our amazing designer, but they get the job done. And they're totally customizable. You can copy the board, create your own version, and play around with any of the tools that you like. Okay, going back to the Ikigai. So the Ikigai asks 4 key questions. It talks about what makes you come alive, what are you really interested in? Then you have, where can your existing capitals add value? So what you already have, how can you use that to have additional impact? Where would returns on capital help you in your journey? This part is about getting returns from your investments. So where can you invest money that would help you on your journey to get where you want to go? And then the most important is, what are the problems worth solving? So for me, I love cats. I want to have like cat cafes everywhere to reduce stress and anxiety. But is that the best solution for that problem? So applying scientific research and looking at key research like the planetary boundaries and the donut economics framework to see, does the world really need this right now? Is this a priority to solve this issue? So it's like matching your values with what the world needs. That's the first stage. Moving on to the next stage. So now that you know your purpose, the next stage is to understand where you stand in this space. For this, we developed the systemic investing typology framework, which has 3 key archetypes. So you have the traditional investor, you have a systems-aware investor, and then you have a systemic investor. And you have these 8 dimensions along which you can assess where you stand. So this is more like an internal exercise for your organization and so on to see what boxes are you ticking and where do you need to do more work to get to where you want to be. So we have purpose, focus area, motivation, time horizon, evaluation matrix, stakeholder engagement, the geography you're working in, the context you're working in, and then the level of systems analysis that you're doing. So this stage really helps you understand where you stand, where the gaps lie, and what you need to do in order to move forward to become more systemic in your approach. And then we have, I think this is the most popular one so far. This is the one that I see most people playing around in the Miro board in. This is stage 3, which is the stakeholder map. So now that you know your purpose, you know where you stand, you need to understand who else is in this space. Because as you see, just by looking at the complexity of the challenges that we're facing today, no single investor or player can really have a silver bullet to fix everything. So you need to collaborate with people who are working in this space and complement each other's capabilities. So this is really about mapping who is doing what. If you look at the Miro board, you'll see we have put the issue at the center of the stakeholder map instead of any specific player. This allows you to give a more wider view of the system instead of from one single person's vantage point. So you know everyone else who needs to be on the table with you when you're trying to make a change in this space. And so you have these different players around in a co-centric figure, and it helps you prioritize who to engage when. It also highlights the roles that they play. So it's basically like a compass that you can use when you go out in the world and engage with different stakeholders. There is an excellent research out by one of our colleagues, Sandra Fumi, around backbone organizations, and they're doing amazing work. He's basically analyzing the work that you need to do in order to collaborate between different organizations and what a backbone organization means in the context of systemic investing. So I would really recommend everyone to have a look at that. And then stage 4 is, once you know who's playing in this space, it's analyzing the systemic context. So this stage has what we call an opportunity field scan, which basically allows you to look at the wider context and find opportunities where your specific type of capital and your skills can really add value. So this goes beyond looking at just a single portfolio company, but maybe analyzing the value chain and so on to see where the gaps lie and how you can contribute. I'll talk more about this specific tool in the next section when we go into like a mini case. Number 5 is mapping the system and identifying high leverage points. This, I think, is the most popular one. There are a lot of really cool system maps coming out. There's one by Transcap for regenerative agriculture, which is an excellent example that you can look at. Again, I'll go deeper into this tool as well when we go into the mini case. But this is really about understanding the flows of capital, influence, power, within a system, understanding the system's boundary, where you need to, figure out this is where I'm going to work on, this is beyond my scope. It also looks at feedback loops, like what in part A of the system is impacting part B, part C, and like coming back in a circle. And it's where you really start to narrow down your focus towards what exactly you want to do if you want to achieve your change goals. The last is stage 6, which is coordinate and deploy a multi-capital strategy. This is the part where everything from the starter kit comes together. So like you take all the different pieces and you put it together. You look at your capital inventory, your impact focus, your awareness of the system you want to work in, and you use all of that to create your deployment strategy. and then measure impact, and that feedbacks into learning and changing your strategy and so on. There is an excellent publication by CSB, the Center for Sustainable Finance and Private Wealth, around multi-capital strategies. And again, that's a resource I would recommend everyone to have a look at. It basically uses examples from around 30 investors and how they've used the multi-capital strategy in their different investments. But this is the part where you decide, will you invest? Will you donate? Will you join a conference or an industry association? Will you advocate for new regulations or use your reputation to raise awareness and bring more people into this issue area? Or will you do a mixture of all of these? So this is really where you decide what capital to use, how to use it, and then assess your impact and then learn and then change your strategy if there's a need. I'm going to pause here, and we're very lucky to have Ruben joining us virtually, who was one of our investor partners. And he has agreed to share his perspective and experience. So Ruben is also Sloan alumni. He was a former managing director at Barclays, and he has a lot of experience in this space. He is currently working with another Sloan alumni, and they're starting a venture fund together, focusing on real economy, systems change, sustainability, and finance. Thank you, Ruben, so much for joining us, and I will hand it over to you to share your experience on how you developed one of the tools and how you've been using it so far.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, Jason and Hibah, for inviting me to briefly share our experience at Kautal Ventures, which is our fund, as a host organization in the inaugural SISC, so Systemic Investing for Social Change Working Group, in the fall of 2024, and a little more about the stakeholder ecosystem tool that we developed with a wonderful MIT Sloan student, which was Izzy Newman-Sanders. So we knew from the beginning that systemic change requires more than capital. It demands alignment across different actors, which are shaping, enabling, or constraining conditions. So since coalition building and orchestration are central to systemic investing, and because our own name, Kautal, the name of our fund means unity and collective action in Fulani, which is the West African tribe of my partner, our spirit is about collaboration, is about system level intent. So, but having said that, developing and nurturing a broad base of coalition actors around a shared transformational intent and a theory of transformation is easier said than done, right? It's very easy to say, but when Jason and Hibah invited us to SISC, we saw that as the perfect opportunity to refine and validate our approach around that and have a hands-on collaboration with MIT Sloan students as well as practitioners across the whole investing ecosystem. So we saw this is complex. Participating in SISC would be extremely helpful. So through research and conversations with system thinking experts and regional specialists, Izzy, the student who was helping us, helped us create a comprehensive stakeholder ecosystem map, identifying key actors we need to engage. And across those, we had capital providers, we had knowledge partners, enabling organizations, infrastructure providers, sector-specific enablers, ecosystem and catalyst networks, grassroots and informal actors, and finally, policy and regulatory players. All this to align incentive, surface the blind spots, and reinforce, as I was saying before, the enabling conditions. So that was the outcome of this exercise, identifying those 8 categories of stakeholders or partners. Based on that, we then expanded our research across all these categories, and we populated the map with illustrative and prospective stakeholder logos, right? So we say, okay, who could be on paper all these stakeholders for us? So that requires a lot of research, and some of them are already engaged, but others will need to continue to update as we establish formal collaborations going forward. So the tool was not designed only for our needs as Kautal Ventures, but also to contribute to field building. So other systemic investors like yourself can use it when you think about your own ecosystems. That was the intent. So to create a tool that we can use, but everyone else in the space can use, so we contribute to field building. So since coalition building is an art, right? This is what we are concluding, that it's an art, and investors alone may not have the structures or the skills to play this role fully alone. Our next step was also to seek partnership with a backbone organization. We call it backbone organization, which in this case is a foundation, which is already active in this space. So there is a foundation that is active exactly in the same space we are active, which in our case is economic inclusion in Francophone Africa. And then in parallel, we are also exploring other collaborations, for example, with MIT RIP. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's an initiative within MIT, which is called Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program, MIT RIP. And we are thinking of collaborating with them to bring additional structure and credibility to our orchestration efforts. In summary, our goal, as you can see, is not only to act as investors, but also as conveners of a broader shift and design change, not that a single actor like us cannot do alone. So we are now working, in addition to last year, this year we are participating in the second edition of SISC. Again, we've been invited again. And now we are working on a systemic impact evaluation framework to measure the impact. Before it was about defining the stakeholders and how we go about that. Now it's about defining how we measure impact, which is equally important, and with the aim to raise our fund in the next couple of months. So thank you again, Jason, Hibah, and Emma, and the whole team at SISC. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ruben. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ruben. Before I dive into a mini case that sort of like highlights my journey in this space, I want to pause and see if Jason, you want to add anything to the starter kit discussion?
No, I think you're doing great.
Okay.
I mean, I'll just say, I guess I'll just say one quick thing, was just that this is part of a family of things that we're publishing, right? So Hibah mentioned a couple of studies. We've got, if you go to the MIT Owning Impact Project webpage, that's where we put all of the stuff that we produce. A number of different little kind of research studies and reports and guides and tools like this. I'll also just say, Ruben didn't introduce himself as a Sloan alum, but we had him as a student, as a Sloan fellow. And then he started the fund after he graduated, and then with various input from members of our extended team, including Albin Yao, who had been a system design and management student here at Sloan. And so he's like many entrepreneurs in our ecosystem, building off of the capabilities that help here.
Okay, I'm gonna really quickly go over a mini case that basically highlights my journey in this space. I'll talk about the approach, how I figured out that traditional investing wasn't really making the change I wanted to see, and why systemic investing works better in nascent markets. I'll talk about the process, how I started with one investor and then went on to work with two others. And then I will show you the evolution of the tool, as we say, how it came about, where we started, and then a transition from one stage to the next using different tools. Okay. So what you see on the screen right now is the seaweed value chain. So the first project I did was an independent study with Jason Ingle and Sarah Douglas from Third Nature. At that point, we were basically looking at seaweed as an alternative to other products that are out there in the market that are bad for the environment. They're causing CO2 emissions, harming the environment. There's a lot of waste. There are alternates like fiber, plastic, and protein that come from seaweed, which are more regenerative and good for the economy as well as the people consuming them. And so at this point, I was working with one single investor and looking at one type of capital within one single industry. And even with this limited approach, you can see if you start mapping the seaweed value chain from seeding, farming, harvesting, storage, distribution, processing, wholesale, retail to consumers, you see that there are different types of bottlenecks or enablers, as you can say. So the tasks that you see here are different issues that could be potentially solved in order to create systems change. And even with this picture, you can see that there are like multiple issues that you need to resolve in order for this industry to scale. And then one type of capital cannot really solve the scale of the issues that we see on the screen. And so the next step was, once we had the seaweed value chain mapped in, I wanted to work with another investor to see if there's if you can add more capital to the story, if you can add more stakeholders to the story. And I was able to work with Builders Vision as part of CISC. They're a very different organization because they work as a platform. They have access to catalytic capital, they have access to grants. They also have market rate return investments. They work across the full, not the full, but a major spectrum of the economic capital is the term that we're using in this space. So let me move to the next one. So that conversation with Builders Vision led me to develop the seaweed value chain into what we call the opportunity field scan. What you see on the screen are 4 key steps of developing this field scan. You start with plotting the main value chain, and then you prioritize and rank different tasks that need to be done in order to scale the industry, for example. And then now the key difference here is you start to assign capital and actors. So you move beyond that single type of capital and single investor approach to working around different teams and different stakeholders. And then you also look at synergies across different portfolio companies. So Builders Vision, for me, I work specifically with their ocean space. And even within the ocean space, they work with multiple different types of actors. And they have different teams with different mandates and different priorities that you need to understand and collaborate with. So the field scan that we developed was really a workshop and brainstorming tool where maybe people within your team or people across different teams and different stakeholder organizations can come together and really work together to come up with the solution for the seaweed value chain. In this part, you can see that a lot of the investments, at least for this specific investor, were either in the front of the value chain or at the real end. And even within this space, you can see that not a lot of money was going into processing and the middle infrastructure, which we're calling the missing middle. And once you plot your portfolio companies on top and the different players that you can work with, along with the different types of capital, you can come up with solutions that go beyond the single solution, silver bullet, single investor, single type of capital, traditional strategy that we have. Builders Vision is very unique because not only do they have different types of capital, they work with research institutions, they work with education institutions, startups, and they even work with National Geographic around documentaries and creating awareness. So they are a very systemic organization that can really change and impact the value chain in this space. But even with this enhanced tool, we could see that there's some key players missing in this space. What about the community leaders? What about the people, consumers actually consuming these products? What about the environment itself? Yeah, seaweed is a regenerative product, but it does have impact on the environment. So even within this opportunity field scan that enhances and goes beyond the value chain, there are key players missing. Which led me to work with another investor called Catapult Ocean. And they are basically a global investor in the ocean space. So they have investments in US, Europe, Asia, Africa. And I was able to work on this project with Jason and Alban Yao that he mentioned and Brian and Builders and Catapult to really come up with a more holistic and complete picture. So we developed what's called the Healthy System Framework. This is kind of think of yourself as a system. So the human body has different subsystems within that need to work together and in balance. So you have your nervous system, your circulatory system, your digestive system. So you have all these subsystems that need to work together in harmony in order for you to have a fulfilling and healthy life. Similarly, in any system, you have key subsystems, which includes the healthy markets, thriving communities, and flourishing ecosystems. So this healthy system map is more like an aspirational state, a future state where you're in balance and all the 3 subsystems are thriving. So this is our very basic version for the ocean economy. I'm just going to quickly read over from the screen. This highlights the key connections between the different subsystems. For example, if you look at thriving communities and healthy markets, you need behavior change to take place for markets to change. You need political advocacy and engagement to change regulations and how business is done. At the same time, you need markets to function properly for you to have healthy food security, for you to have a livelihood, for other activities to have a thriving community. At the same time, you need the ecosystem to be flourishing as well, because if you don't have enough fish in the ocean, you can't fish, you can't feed the local community that depends on fishing as their primary source of nutrition. So all these three systems need to work together in order for you to have a healthy system. And then again, like breaking balance in any one of the system will have negative consequences. So for example, in the short term, if you're overfishing, yes, you're getting market gain, but you're disrupting the ecosystem, which would lead to ecosystem collapse and loss of livelihood and eventually hurting the community. So this map was recently shared with the wider audience in UN Ocean Conference. It has really helped start conversations around bringing global stakeholders together. I've only shared the simple version, but there's a more detailed version that really highlights the different industries in the healthy markets, the different aspects in thriving communities, and flourishing ecosystems. If you go further deep, if you want to, we have additional layers that go into this map. So you have the intervention layer along with potential solutions. And we also map portfolio companies who are specifically working in this space. This helps us to identify where a lot of investment is already going in, at least for these two investors, but it also shows where investments are not going in. So this shows like key intervention solutions, but not a lot of portfolio companies that are working in this space. So this could potentially be an area you can explore, or maybe someone else is investing in this. So it gives you a more holistic picture of the full system along with the subsystems, and giving an idea where you need to intervene and with who. I will pause at that. And
In case folks can't read in the bottom, oceanreturns.com is the web page where this has been published, so you can interact with it directly. So I think at this point, I want to just step back again from the specific examples that we've just heard around economic inclusion in Francophone West Africa with Ruben, in ocean systems investing that Hibah just described, and come back to this big picture to say that there is a phenomenon here of systems thinking coming into the financial space around these topics of sustainability. And that is manifesting in a lot of different ways. This is a picture that we've been kind of tinkering with and thinking about, and this is kind of what I was describing before, is that you have impact investors who have bumped up against the limits of what they can do with just one seaweed company investment or one financial inclusion startup or one Beyond Meat company who are trying to think about how can we, if our aim is to invest for systems change, how can we move toward a more systemic investing practice? And then on the other side, we have these larger institutional investors, more fiduciary finance first investors saying, how can we mitigate systemic risk? And how can we, what are the tools that we can use for that? We've tried to be kind of a meeting ground at this MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative of this arena of practices as they evolve, and to help advance the theory and practice of the space in collaboration with all of the investors and folks and students and alumni that we have access to. So that's again, just to sort of zoom back out to the bigger context, but I think we should just open it up for questions and what's on the minds of folks here. Yeah.
Kimberly Samha, the CEO of Global Foundation. So we're a family office and we've been investing in this kind of stuff for many, many years.
Yes.
Primarily our thing is waste to energy, and food is the intersection.
Great.
So here's the question in terms of how this,
when I see the charts that you guys came up with, the problem with complex adaptive systems is that they look complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the charts that you had, even as much as you kind of narrow that stuff down, it's like glazed over,
Yes.
you know? So one of the questions that I get asked all the time is, okay, like I get this big, ratatouille that you put together, but where do I start? Is it that you start with philanthropy and you start moving them backwards into, hey, you're giving your money away anyways? Like, what have you found as effective strategies that create the systemic part without making it so complicated that you lose it?
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. This is exactly so. I would say the starting point I would say is that I don't have like a rubber band as a prop, but just imagine I'm stretching a rubber band here, is that there's a fundamental tension in the idea of systemic investing, where the systemic part is the sort of holistic, rich, multifaceted, interdependent, complex ratatouille, right, that you're describing. And then the other side of it is investing. And investing is a very pragmatic activity. It's about being decisive of this is in, this is out, placing the capital, right? It's a pragmatic, decisive activity, right? And there's a fundamental tension between that holism and that kind of pragmatism. And so all of the practices that we are charting out and illuminating and documenting and celebrating and critiquing are all about how do you hold those tensions, okay? So for example, even just drawing a system boundary and saying, what's the space that we work in, right? That's a move to hold that tension. Because if you draw the picture of, economy is society, environment for the ocean 75% of the planet, we basically just drew the entire planet, right? So it's kind of everything is in that picture. So if I want to kind of zoom in, right, to something that's more tractable and say, I want to work on, decreasing food waste in the United States through innovation in value chains, right? Then that starts to create a more pragmatic space within which we might be able to operate. So investors have to hold that tension first, just by even defining the space that they work in. And then, as far as we described about pathways, let me use the example of the food waste in the United States as a specific case study. So we wrote a case study about Jesse and Betsy Fink and their work in in the food waste arena. They are a couple. Jesse was one of the founding COO of Priceline. When they took the company public, they cashed out. They created a farm, a family office, and a foundation. And he and his wife had met at the forestry school at Yale and wanted to work on climate solutions. They started looking at what's available in terms of climate investing. They saw that the energy space was reasonably crowded. They started playing in that. They built a fund in that. But they said we have to play where we have more additionality. And by having a farm, which had been a lifelong dream, they just noticed after their first couple of harvests that a lot of food was getting wasted on the farm. And they're like, wait, this is crazy. Like, is this true for all farmers? And they started asking questions and they started finding out, yeah, actually, you know what? A lot of food is wasted in the global supply chains. It's hard to quantify. We don't know how to measure it is. So the first move that they made a couple of moves kind of in parallel. One was that they said, let's find nonprofits who are trying to help get food recovered and into the hands of good people, right? And they started doing a couple of small philanthropic donations to nonprofits. Let's see if there are startups who are coming up with technology solutions to help address the food waste challenge. They invested in, spoiler alert, which had come out of MIT Sloan. That was our students here who had a software platform to help companies reduce food waste. But they also said, we got to get our head around the problem as a whole. So they did a philanthropic gift to NRDC, which is a big NGO, to do a study on food waste. There was somebody there who was curious about it, and they said, go do a deeper study. And they did this big report that said 40% of food is wasted globally. The fact that we know that number is because of the Finks funded that study. On the farm, they would rent out the farm for weddings, and the caterers would set up a tent. And they'd just tell the caterers, leave the tent up, we're gonna have some people over tomorrow. And they just would gather together the people who are running the nonprofits that they were giving to, the people who are running the startups that they were funding, the people from the NRDC, the policymakers, and to just have dialogues and learn together about what is this food waste challenge and what does it really look like and how might we move forward on it together, right? So they use their social capital, not just their economic capital, to bring people together and to get those conversations going. And what became clear was that a little bit more coordination was needed if you wanted to get more investors, more startups, and more companies, and more thinkers and policymakers to the table. So their next philanthropic gift was to create a new organization called ReFed, which is a backbone organization. That's a term you heard Ruben use. This turns out to be a really key linchpin of this stuff because fundamentally systemic investing is about coordination. If we go back to our that first picture to say, okay, it's one thing, if we come back to this idea of there's a bunch of different investments and a bunch of different things, how do you provide the coordinative infrastructure for that. So ReFed became the backbone organization for food waste innovation. They created an investor circle that started bringing in other investors. They created a dashboard to see how much capital was flowing into different kinds of food waste solutions. And the total package of investments, this was like blew my mind, because I was thinking when I came into this space, we knew about Builder's Vision, right? This is Lucas Walton. He's an inheritor of the Walton Foundation fortune. We're talking about single to two-digit billions of capital, right? So I thought, this systemic investing is kind of a billionaire's game. The Finks put $5 million into this package of investments. There's now $2 billion a year of capital flowing into food waste solutions that is tracked by the investor circle at ReFed. So it was about the combination of the social, cultural, and symbolic capital with that economic capital to drive things. The sequencing was, so if we step back and we say, well, what's the sequence? What's the pathway? It's a little bit of experimentation and building relationships. It's investing in the coordination, support, and infrastructure for the field to become a thing. The crowding in of other investors and getting them to the table, and then getting the feedback loops going of more people, more money, more activity, more innovation, more success. One of the things that Jesse, I bring Jesse in to speak in my classes sometimes, and one of the things he says is, he said, I love pages of logos. He's like, right? He's like, that is the key. The key is that if you can have a slide where you show all the logos of all the organizations, of all the people who are there, and everybody can kind of see themselves in it, that's how you make something that wasn't a thing into a thing. And it reflects this, I think, orientation to be a backbone, to provide some of that coordinative support. So we see that in other arenas. We did another case study about Tara Health, which is a foundation that worked on women's reproductive health care access. And they served as a backbone organization in that space, investing in a variety of nonprofit and for-profit activities. And then our colleagues at Transcap just released a big piece on financial backbones, which is coordination mechanisms specifically for orchestrating capital, and what does it look like to set those up? Where do we need them? And then we just published a study on on the organizational design of backbone organizations. How resource intensive are they, and how do you fit the organizational design to the kind of coordination that they're aiming to support? Sorry, that was a little bit long-winded answer, but I was hoping to get to tell that story, and we had some time to do it.
Well, I think your key is this backbone.
Yeah.
This is the first time I've been exposed to that as a formal structure.
Yeah.
I think that's something that is very valuable.
Yeah, and it's something that the systems philanthropy space has understood for a while in the collective impact literature, and it's just kind of like bringing that into the impact investing. I want to take further questions offline, and because I want to give Jen a chance to talk a little further about what does it look like for students to get involved in this space forward.
Thank you. Thank you much.
Okay, great. So I want to be mindful of time, so we only have a couple of minutes. Rest assured that we will send out the slides to everybody that RSVP'd on Sloan Groups. If you didn't RSVP, just flag us down so that you can get the slides. So I broke down 6 different ways that you can think about embedding systemic investing into your curriculum, into your engagement, into your program here at Sloan. And so I've broken it down here. I'm not going to read through all 6, but I've highlighted the tangible ways that you can take advantage of things offered to you as a Sloan student. In the blue on each slide, which again, I'll share with the community after this event, highlighting different classes, communities, student clubs, conferences, case competitions that students should really leverage in order to think about enhancing your skills within systemic investing. And so, again, it's a lot of information and we only have 1 minute, so I'll be sure to share this. But I also advise coming to our team and meeting with me one-on-one for an advising session. So if you want to explore any one of these areas, I encourage you to do so. And I'm going to leave you with one tangible resource that I highly recommend you take a look at. download, bookmark, refer back to, and that's this streams of study. So this is meant to be your launch pad in sustainable economics, finance, and accounting. So it's a little bit more broad, but it includes some of these systemic investing topics. And the piece that I really want to highlight within this student resource is the how to break into sustainable EF&A fields. So I worked with a number of alumni to actually think about the critical skills, experiences, that you need to consider if you're heading into a specific area of EF&A. So a quick snapshot is up on the screen here, but highly recommend bookmarking this resource, which we constantly update with new information. So with that, thank you so much for joining our lunch series today. Our team will stick around for the next 15 minutes to answer questions, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you.